And then there's the, as you say, the propaganda film, One World or None,
Yes.
1946. So this is really in the air.
Yes.
In the 40s.
Yeah, and again, the one world or none, this is, 46 is very different from 45 because you've had Hiroshima and Nagasaki at that point, and you have nuclear weapons. You don't yet have thermonuclear ones, but something has really changed by the late 40s.
Through the years, the scientists of the world have freely exchanged their knowledge. This worldwide search for truth has led to the greatest of all discoveries, atomic energy. Only through proper control of atomic energy can we answer the question how this great force may be used for the benefit of mankind. Atomic energy, freed from the menace of war, can be for all people in all nations the great fusing force of one world.
It's similar to the message of Oppenheimer, which is that you need world government to have peace, and the alternative to peace is atomic war. And so without a world government with real teeth that actually controls the nuclear weapons, you're going to have world war. So it's one world or none.
The choice is clear. It is life or death.
The sort of parallel but very alternative Christian theological framing I have is Antichrist or Armageddon. And what Sam and I in this piece articulate is, in some sense, it's the exact same thing. Antichrist or Armageddon versus, one world or none. But it points in a very different direction, because when you frame it in the sort of political, philosophical way, you always go straight to one world. That's obviously the right answer. Antichrist or Armageddon, those are both quite bad. The one world totalitarian state, the runaway catastrophes of, dual use science and technology. And that pushes us to find some moderate, narrow third path that's very, very different. Something to avoid, the Scylla of Antichrist, the Charybdis of Armageddon.
Others and myself also, I asked him, if you think over-regulation or a worldwide regulation is the most dangerous thing that even you call the Antichrist, Palantir would be the perfect tool to use. So if we get an Antichrist, Palantir would be the first thing the Antichrist would need to target ours. And then he doesn't give a convincing answer. And I challenged him with Simone Weil, who is a really representative of kenotic thinking, because kenosis is very dear to her heart. She says only a God who is aligned with kenosis or with the Tzimtzum, the Jewish Tzimtzum, who makes himself smaller in order to enable creation, is the true God, and everything else is just a human projection. And she writes, and I told him that she writes in her Needs for Root, so her last book, fragmentary book, that the French people need nothing more than greatness. Greatness, the need for greatness is bigger than the need for bread, but another type of greatness. And then she says, and I find it marvelous to think about it, because she wrote that in 1943 towards the French. If you French people are thinking Napoleon is an example of good greatness, and do not understand that the greatness represented by Napoleon is the same greatness represented by Adolf Hitler, that's really a challenging demand. You have understood nothing. They all represent Roman greatness.
I want a Roman salute from everybody, a Roman salute to our Caesar, a Roman salute to our church. Hail Christ, hail Caesar, hail Rome.
And this is not the greatness we need. We need the kenotic greatness, if such a paradox is possible. And I said that even a little bit more developed than I did it now to Thiel, and there was no response.
Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Dutch Girard Society, especially to our esteemed speaker, Professor Wolfgang Palaver. Welcome to the members of the Girard Ring, to all guests. Please feel at home, including Guido Vanheeswijck, who gave a very nice presentation in January that was very well received. In both meetings, we are trying to understand better the MAGA interpretation of the mimetic theory as advocated by the tech investor Peter Thiel. Where does it come from? What is its appeal? And does it do justice to the theory? It turns out that this discussion has an important theological aspect, and that's why we are extremely happy to have with us now Wolfgang Palaver, an internationally recognized Girard expert and Professor Emeritus in Catholic social thought at the University of Innsbruck. Among many other things, Wolfgang participated in Christian-Muslim dialogue. He has published numerous articles and books, including a general introduction to mimetic theory. And he also knows Peter Thiel quite well and has challenged Thiel's interpretation in public debates and writings. We are eager to hear today what he has to say, not only about misleading interpretations of Girard, but also on how we should interpret Girard, and on his particular relevance in the current age of anger. The program of today is that we will first listen to the introduction of Wolfgang, then to a conversation of Wolfgang and Guido, in the form of a conversation with Philip van Wijk, our fellow. After a short break, we will have time for the usual questions and answers. So, Wolfgang, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I'm happy to meet you again and also discuss with you my reflections on Peter Thiel's use of theology. So I gave my short, brief paper the title, A Girardian Discussion of Peter Thiel's Use of Theology. So I will not address directly MAGA, but we can discuss it later, because MAGA is a little bit more complex and not all MAGA people are fans of Peter Thiel. So it's a mixture. So I want to address the topic in 3 steps. A first step, I would highlight the libertarian worldview, the libertarian background of Peter Thiel, which I think is important and it's still present in some way. And how does it relate to mimetic theory, how not? In a second step, I will deal with Thiel's take on Girard's mimetic theory. And the final part that is most dear to my heart, I will reflect on an essay by Thiel with which he tries to reconcile his emphasis on technological acceleration with the Christian spirit. So first, Thiel's libertarian roots, and I will explore them by first reflect a little bit on essays on capitalism by Ayn Rand. And then secondly, a short view of an important book by James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg, The Sovereign Individual, Mastering the Transition to the Information Age, which came out in 1997. So first, Ayn Rand's libertarianism emphasizes the liberty of the single individual, even tending towards Nietzsche's Übermensch. And she criticizes all collective institutions like the state or the church in seeing them nothing but machines that do not hesitate to sacrifice people for their purposes. This anti-sacrificial stance of Ayn Rand led her to the rejection of the Vietnam War and to the rejection of the draft in general, which is a little bit astonishing because now we have a different mood in the United States, but unfortunately also in parts of Europe. According to Rand, wars are the result of statism. She also claimed that capitalism is incompatible with altruism and mysticism. One of her essays deals with the encyclical Populorum Progressio of Pope Paul VI that was published in 1967 and was trying to strengthen global solidarity. In Ayn Rand's eyes, this encyclical is, however, a dangerous threat to people who might be destroyed by a totalitarian church that seeks global domination. She therefore uses the title Requiem for Man for this essay. Now, Thiel's rejection of the Iraq War of 2003, his rejection of neoconservative politicians like George W. Bush, and his former political support of the Republican Senator Ron Paul, who criticized the war on libertarian reasons, shows Thiel's closeness to Rand's worldview. It matches with Thiel's support of Girard's early anti-sacrificial stance and with his warnings of a totalitarian world state that is close to Ayn Rand's critique of the Catholic Church. Rand's critique of altruism and mysticism also is close to Thiel's position. You don't find mysticism in writings and talks of Thiel, and altruism is also not in the forefront. The difference between Rand and Thiel is regarding religion. Whereas Rand rejects religion in general, Thiel represents a particular type of a Christian political theology. He shares, however, Rand's critique of Catholicism, as he referred to his Lutheran background, whose church was, according to Thiel, a less globally centralized church. In Thiel's eyes, the Protestant political project lines up more closely with the libertarian view. The second hint to discover the libertarian background is this book, The Sovereign Individual, which is a book that inspired Thiel to found PayPal. And it's a book that addresses the digital revolution that is so dramatically changing our world. It predicts the demise of the nation state. It predicts the twilight of democracy, not by recommending dictatorship, but rather an entrepreneurial government, the commercialization of sovereignty. From a theological perspective, this book is interesting too, because it draws a parallel between the demise of the medieval church caused by the Reformation and the overcoming of the state, of today's states, by the digital revolution. The title of the relevant chapter that discusses this parallel is Parallels between the senile decline of the Holy Mother Church and the nanny state. Like the Reformation that stopped the medieval church with its heavy financial burden on its members, the digital revolution will stop the state from collecting taxes from its citizens. Thiel wrote a preface to the second edition of this book that came out in 2020, in which he discusses its false and correct predictions. Most interestingly is his remark on the difference between AI on the one hand and cryptocurrency on the other. He claims, I quote Thiel, "It is no coincidence that AI is the favorite technology of the Communist Party of China. Strong cryptography at the other pole holds out the prospect of decentralized and individualized world. If AI is communist, crypto is libertarian. This remark shows that despite recent remarks that AI is the only hope for a significant technological breakthrough, he is closer to crypto in his heart. So that was my first point. The second point, Thiel on René Girard's mimetic theory. And I think that's what is most interesting for you. I already showed you an affinity between libertarianism and Girard's early rejection of sacrifice. In an interview, he remarked that there were two major reasons why he liked Girard already when he was a student at Stanford. First, he appreciated Girard's attempt to address the major questions of humanity by not limiting himself to a narrow academic field. I mean, this is a critical. We need academics in the narrow fields, but we need also some who go beyond them. But Girard was surely way out of a narrow field, and that appreciated Thiel a lot. Second, he also liked Girard's anthropological apology of Christianity. We should, however, also not overlook the fact that Thiel recently claimed that Girard's influence on his own way of thinking is weaker than people usually believe. Maybe that's also a result of interventions we did recently in Innsbruck, and told him he should not refer to Girard when he explains his political projects. I can tell you about that more. There is a deeper connection between Girard's anthropology and Thiel's entrepreneurship and his emphasis on technology if we refer to Girard's thesis how the biblical overcoming of the scapegoat mechanism opened the door for the modern economy as well as for modern science and technology. Girard wrote in The Scapegoat, the scientific spirit, like the spirit of enterprise in an economy, is a byproduct of the profound action of the gospel text. I mean, I think you are familiar with this thesis of Girard. Thiel connected to mimetic theory most strongly in his book 0 to 1, Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. He follows Girard's insight into the destructive side of competition and recommends avoiding the most competitive fields for those areas where you can build a monopoly. It is not bad advice to focus on what you can do best and what you like most instead of following fashion only. Monopolies, however, are not a satisfactory solution for society. Monopolies destroy the market and are bait for us as communers. Tech pros who became monopolists have profited economically, of course, enormously. Thiel's connection to mimetic anthropology remains quite limited now systematically, not what he says about it. There are many more ways to avoid destructive competition, and competition is not destructive in general. From a mimetic perspective, religious wisdom recommends preferring eternal goods which are not exclusive to temporal goods that are by their nature divisive. Thiel does not address this religious response to mimetic rivalry. This corresponds to the fact that Jesus is completely absent in Thiel's book, as the Stanford professor Adrian Taub has recognized in his book on the thinking in the thoughts and the thinking in Silicon Valley. Taub writes, there is no Jesus in this story to make visible the bad effects of mimetic desire, but there are smart young people banding together to seed startups. Tech will set us free. Taub, however, I'm not a big fan of Taub. I just like this observation that is true, that Jesus is absent. I mean, that's also a problem if you talk all the time about the Antichrist and has nothing to say about Jesus. This is a little one-sidedness. Taub, however, makes the mistake. Taub doesn't like Girard. I mean, he's a young literary professor in Stanford. He's not a fan of Girard. And tries to show that the weaknesses of Thiel goes back to weaknesses of Girard, but he represents a misunderstanding, a one-sided misunderstanding of mimetic theory, against which I fight for 40 years all over the place wherever I see that. Because he attributes an ontology of violence to Girard's mimetic theory, completely overlooking the fact that Girard claimed that mimetic desire is intrinsically good. Mimetic theory explains the high likelihood of conflicts that Girard expresses in the same book, in that he underlines the basic goodness of mimetic desire. It depends on the nature of the objects that are at the center of our desires and how we desire them, if our mimetic desires result in violence or not. Thiel comes close to an ontology of violence when he declares, with reference to Leo Strauss, that humans are potentially evil or at least dangerous beings. I mean, we are dangerous beings in some way, but there is the question, do you explore especially the potential for evil in us, or do you explore the potential for good in us? And the potential for good is sometimes even completely overlooked. A one-sided approach in this regard is also expressed by a highly estimated Girardian and friend of mine, Jean-Pierre Dupuis, who just wrote a recent piece on Thiel in the Philosophie magazine in France, where he declares in an essay on Thiel that Carl Schmitt and René Girard both maintain that there is a violence inherent in human nature. And I never would have become a Girardian if I would believe in that. I mean, I wrote a second dissertation on Carl Schmitt from a Girardian perspective in order to show the difference, and there is no ontology of violence in Girard. So I come to my third point on collateral damage as a modern type of sacrifice coming along with technological progress. Peter Thiel's Antichrist lectures created a huge media hype all over the world. I am benefiting partly and a little bit suffering from that media hype. To Europeans, it sounds strange to address such obscure topics like Armageddon or the Antichrist. In the US, where people are much more used to religious and biblical terms, this resonates differently and often also more positively. To understand Thiel, we must be aware that he started as a libertarian in favor of technological acceleration. He justified his stress on technology by referring to our need to support 10 billion people living in our world, to fight against diseases like cancer or dementia, and to strengthen longevity. He even dares to reflect on means to overcome this. And I mean, in this regard, I'm on his side. I don't think we should prevent that. I don't think it would be very good to say religions should stop that. This is bad religion. This doesn't understand the one root from which technology and religion comes from. We are called to become co-creators in God's creation. Thiel stresses that, and I would not criticize that. But I have a criticism, because sometimes after my lecture said, you have no criticism. I have a lot of criticism, but you have to listen carefully. I don't see him as a monster and don't demonize him, but I point to some problems. In 2015, Thiel published an article with the title Against Edenism. Edenism meaning going back to paradise, to Eden. So with the title Against Edenism in the Christian journal First Things, that helps us to understand his position regarding theology better. With reference to the last book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, he claims that the future will be different from the paradisical beginnings. A return to Eden is impossible in his eyes, and he is right in this regard. In this article, he introduces Goethe's Faust as an example of a person who is always striving forward and who also stands for technological progress. According to Thiel, Faust exemplifies enlightenment hopes for science and technology. Thiel also refers affirmatively to Faust's project of reclaiming land from the sea, as it is described in the second part of Goethe's tragedy. And I'm very happy to present this lecture in the Netherlands, because in this regard, you are a Faustian nation for the good. So you, Thiel, and Faust, you all do the same thing. There is, however, theologically speaking, a genuine problem with Faust, according to Goethe, as you probably know. Faust risked his soul by engaging in a bet with the devil. Thiel therefore claims that we should not conclude that to busy oneself like Faust, one must forget about one's immortal soul. Thiel wants to connect the forward-going attitude of Faust with the biblical spirit. He tries to achieve this by relating Faust's land reclamation, so the Dutch way of making the Netherlands great again, or something, like, or larger in some way, to verses in the book of Revelation that predicts a future without the sea. Listen how Thiel ends his article, and I quote the ending of the article. We should remain open to the idea that even Faust's land reclamation project is a part of God's larger plan. After all, in the Bible, the sea is the place where the demon Leviathan lives, and it symbolizes the chaos that must be rolled back. And chaos will be rolled back all the way. And he ends the article by quoting Revelation chapter 21, verse 1. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and the sea was no more. And I mean, this is a little bit a fundamentalist, biblicistic way of proving that, but it's a strong argument to show what Faust did could be supported by biblical references. You don't have to sell your soul to be Faustian. Thiel's theological reflection tries to convince Christians, evangelicals, and conservative Catholics especially, that technological acceleration is fully in line with the biblical spirit. He explicitly mentions the so-called Christian right and the Hollywood left as resistors of technological or scientific progress. So it's interesting that he, in this article, talks about the Christian right that he tries to convince in favor of technology. I think that Thiel's Antichrist lecture 2 tries to convince religious people that an unregulated technological acceleration is compatible with Christianity, because all those who want to regulate technology, Greta Thunberg's fight against climate change, Nick Bostrom's warning against the superintelligence, or Eliza Yudkowsky's trial to limit research on artificial intelligence, are in Thiel's eyes legionnaires of the Antichrist. Thiel, however, overlooked or sidelined a big problem that Goethe used as a warning against the dangers that accompany the rise of modernity in his tragedy. Even Adorno said that Goethe, in the second part of Faust, already reflected on the dialectics of enlightenment, so to say. Goethe was in favor of science, but also saw already and observed accompanying dangers that can come along with it. Faust's land reclamation project results in the killing of Philemon and Baucis and their visitor, an elderly couple that owned a little part of the land with a chapel and few trees that stood in the way of Faust's great plan. Faust ordered Mephistopheles to get these people out of the way. Faust said, "Then go and push them aside for me." Mephistopheles, in German, to put them aside has a double meaning. I mean, move it to another place. And Faust had a substitute place, but it also means to kill them. And Mephistopheles, who is also a person of action, quick action, kills this elderly couple and the visitor that is just their guest. Faust regrets that later, but is responsible for this murder. Baucis, the elderly woman, talks already before she is killed explicitly about human sacrifices, where she describes what comes along with Faust, with this kind of project. I mean, there is a reality behind that, because when they did such big problems, and I think that happened also in the Netherlands, these big technological projects have victims in that sense. I mean, I read in some literature, it's some construction in this way. I don't know where it happened, maybe in Germany or somewhere. There were 1,500 people who were killed overdoing this project and so on. What Baucis calls human sacrifices, and of course as Girardians we are interested in such terms, are of course not sacrifices that are rooted in the scapegoat mechanism and that Thiel, like Girard, would criticize, but are form of collateral damage that are not intentionally aimed at, but are the result of an indifference against human beings that might become victims of projects that are not taking all people that might possibly get involved into account. There's a very interesting reflection on this Philemon und Baucis passage in Goethe's Faust by the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa. I don't know if he already conquered the Netherlands also. His book Resonance has been translated in several languages, and he is one who made very interesting observations. So a couple of years ago, not with Thiel in view at all, he wrote about this section in Faust. Near the end of the second part of the tragedy, Faust appears as an economically, technologically driven political entrepreneur who attempts to increase his share of the world in a literal sense by wresting ever more land from the sea, even if he has to walk over the corpses of the old couple Philemon and Baucis to do it. Faust actually has these two representatives of the ancient world murdered because he then cannot take possession of the tiny speck of land and bring it under his controls. And in the end of this observation, Rosa said, what is lacking here? What is lacking is a resonant way of relating to the world. Faust's attempts to appropriate world have left him radically alienated and incapable of empathy. He remains situated in the world without any relation to it. When you read this passage and you think about the tech pros, you have the feeling with this description and explanation of Faust, you have also a description of the dangers that comes along with the projects of the I need 3 more minutes, then I'm finished. I'm a little bit beyond 20 minutes. When I read Rosa's characterization of Faust, when I read it, I felt he was describing the spirit of the tech pros of Silicon Valley. They lack empathy and a human resonance with other people and the world. Richness and power cause a decrease of resonance with others, as studies show. I refer to Douglas Rushkoff's book, Survival of the Richest, which shows that for the very rich people, it's even really difficult to have resonance. They cannot walk through a town and see homeless people, for instance. They cannot see the problems. They have to protect themselves. They have a protected bubble, and if they have not a lot of resonance before, after a couple of years, there is no resonance left, I would say.
They create disgust. They create disgust for themselves, for the homeless. So it's
yeah, but if they don't see it, it's even worse.
Yeah.
So Thiel's theology so the interesting thing is Thiel does not talk about this killing at all. So that's left out of the article. So it's just Faust is a good example, and the Bible shows that what Faust does is part of God's plan. that this couple is killed is not mentioned. This is really worrying. I mean, at least the publisher of the journal should have asked, shouldn't we make just one reference? It was not good to kill them. It's omitted, it's forgotten, it's without resonance. Thiel's theology that omits this murder is a Gnostic type of theology that remains disconnected from people, the world, and the creation. George Becker's essay on Thiel's libertarian futurism addresses some of the dangerous outcomes that might occur if the technological acceleration does not include an universalist ethical perspective. I quote George Becker, "In Thiel's techno-utopia, a few thousand Americans might own robot-driven cars and live to 150, while millions of others lose their jobs to computers that are far smarter than they are, then perish at 60, unquote. Technological progress needs to be embedded in a broader ethical framework. Artificial intelligence, that is, according to Thiel, humanity's last hope to overcome technological and scientific stagnation, is even in need of including ethics from its first stage of development. It needs ethics by design. We also need a much broader understanding of theology and Christianity, so that all our technological attempts to remain embedded in a worldview that aims at the universal common good, takes care of the most marginalized people and the whole creation. We need regulation to prevent our technological projects from sacrificing other people as collateral damage." Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Wolfgang, for this very interesting introduction of those ideas. I was surprised by being brought back to the position of Faust. When I come in Kenya, where I many times travel, people tend to say to me, God created the world and the Dutch created the Netherlands. So we are equal to God somehow, but now we are brought back to a Faustian position. That's something different. Thank you so much, surprisingly. We are delighted that Guido is in our midst to give comments or ask questions to whatever Wolfgang has brought on the table. I won't bring in my position that much because we can just have an interaction between our two brothers. Thank you so much. So the floor is for you first, Guido.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the very interesting introduction. I will limit myself to raising a question, one or two questions, with regard to the three parts of the lecture. The first part is the libertarian background of Peter Thiel. When you read his influential essay, The Straussian Moment, on the final page, Thiel says, "I'm not a liberal and I'm not a conservative." I know everyone is talking about, and I think you are right, that he is a libertarian, but he himself seems to contradict that at the end of the Straussian Moment. So his position is a kind of mid-position. How do you see that, at first glance, contradiction between Thiel as a libertarian and his rejection of being a liberal or a libertarian in the Straussian Moment? And maybe related to that, you said, if I understood well, that AI and the cryptocurrency are important for him, and especially the cryptocurrency. Is that related to his friendship to David O. Sachs, who is the crypto tsar at the moment of Donald Trump, and they wrote together the diversity myth? These are my two questions with regard to the first part.
I mean, first of all, I was part of the group of 9 when he presented the Straussian movement, because that was a little workshop over 4 days, 5 days, with Girard present, and we discussed Carl Schmitt, Leo Strauss, Eric Voegelin, and Thiel's contribution was the Straussian movement. And I have to confess, we all distributed the papers that were presented before the workshop. So I read a Straussian movement on the Californian beach before the workshop, and we discussed it. I do not recall the discussion. I don't know what was my reaction, but we discussed it intensively, all the things. And I reread it later several times, and I still cannot tell you what is really the main thing he wants to tell, because it's very contradictory. But today, I think more and more we should not forget that this was close to 9/11. And I think 9/11 changed, first of all, our world, the whole perspective. Thiel, just at that time, 2003, created Palantir, which is also not a libertarian project, probably the best tool for the Antichrist, or to observe people, to control people. And I think in that article he challenged some liberal assumptions and sees people probably have a lot of potential for the evil. So he tries to play it now in a world of nationalism, of wars and so on. So some of the predictions, when you read this book, the Sovereign Individual, they say wars will disappear, all those bad things will disappear, and that didn't happen. And 9/11 was really a shock, also for Thiel, in my sense, because he saw how easily it is to go into the United States and blow up those buildings. So my view, I do not have yet the right terms. I think he is still a libertarian, but after 9/11, a libertarian with a lot of anxiety, and the inside there is some need of national political state protection. However, this state protection should be as small as possible, as efficient as possible in some way. Some people say he rejects AI if it's in the hand of China, the Communist Party of China, but it's good if he is in charge of it. That's also a thesis you can. So I'm myself struggling with that question, and I think that's a little bit the riddle. When he talks about the katechon, he takes up this figure of the restrainer from Carl Schmitt in some way, but he deviates from Carl Schmitt in saying, so a couple of 2 years ago he gave lectures, and after the lecture he gave the people as a gift a T-shirt with the slogan, "Don't immanentize the katechon." And I was very critical about this term, because I said you can only use this slogan if you believe in the katechon, and if the katechon is really something holy. And probably Schmitt thought that, because Schmitt in his private notebooks wrote about, "I believe in the katechon." And Thiel, of course, learned from Voegelin that the most dangerous thing is when people try to immanentize holy things, eschatology. If human beings try to create with all their efforts the kingdom of God by their means on the world, most of the time it results in hell. So Voegelin said, don't immanentize the eschaton, so don't immanentize the last things. So Thiel used it as a parallel, don't immanentize the katechon, because that would be very dangerous. But you can only make this parallel if you believe in the katechon, and the katechon becomes something saintly or holy. And I think that's a complete misunderstanding of the katechon. And I think I convinced him in this little thing. So he recently said in some things, after talks with him, he changed his mind. In essential things of him, he hardened his position, and he sees my blind spots more closely. But I changed him because when he presented the lecture in Innsbruck, he didn't use the slide, "Don't immanentize the Katechon." And I asked him, did you not use it because I said to you, this is wrong? Or have you changed your mind? And do we not get T-shirts again or no T-shirts? And he said, no, he agrees with me. Because I always refer to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who interestingly also reflected on the Katechon. And Bonhoeffer says, the Katechon is not God. The Katechon is not without sin. The Katechon is the state or all tools of violence that help us to contain violence, but it's not a good thing in itself. It's the plan B of God, you can say. And the church has another task. The church has the task already to let us feel the insights of the kingdom of God, and by living that properly, give the Katechon an orientation to convert. So that's a proper way of talking about the Katechon. So today, and I'm finishing soon, today, but it's a very difficult question. Today, I think he see in people like Trump and so on a Katechon. They make the state in some way smaller. They disrupt, they prevent global regulation. And as long as the Katechon doesn't become himself such a strong power that it would be, in his eyes, the Antichrist. I mean, I don't know how he observes now the most recent developments with Trump, but it's another thing. The crypto thing, I mean, David Sachs was also a co-founder, so he was one of the 4 founders of PayPal, and he's now the crypto and AI czar, and of course that's helpful for the tech pros, because he tries to prevent any regulation, and so for Thiel, and so commercially, economically, that's a great thing. The interesting thing, maybe you allow me one anecdote on David Sachs.
Very shortly.
Because some newspapers wrote that I am a friend of Peter Thiel, and that came out in this million-wise downloaded 6 episodes in the German radio. And they say, Wolfgang Palaver, friend of Peter Thiel. And I did a 3-hour interview with them, and I told them I'm not a friend in the sense of a real friendship, because my closest friend in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley, is Byron Bland, a retired Presbyterian priest. And he, when I was there in 1991, 92, he did extracurricular peace courses. And in one of those peace courses, he said, in May 1992, we know that, he said, and I was there, he said that without the feminist perspective, without the perspective of women, we will not be able really to move forward in regard to peace. And David Sachs was present, so I was with David Sachs in this room, although I did not know him and cannot remember him. But this is mentioned in the diversity myth, also the date, so not Thiel was there, Sachs. And so Thiel and Sachs write in the book how outrageous to make this feminist claim. So my real friend in the Silicon Valley is already criticized and ridiculed in the diversity myth.
She was
sorry for her.
Too woke.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, time for a question with regard to the second part, Thiel and his take on Girard. What you stressed, I think fully correctly, that's one of the problems. I always agree to what I read, Wolfgang Palaver's text, but you stress the ontology of violence in Thiel. And he never mentions Jesus. He mentions the Antichrist, but never Jesus. Well, in that regard, and they are interested, but typical of the Americans, in Armageddon, in apocalypse, a bit strange for Europeans on the one hand. But then I found, reading your text you sent to us, in the preface of Battling to the End, what Girard is writing, and I think it can be applied to Thiel, but that's my question. I quote, "The only Christians who still talk about the apocalypse now are fundamentalists, but they have a completely mythological conception of it. They think that the violence of the end of time will come from God himself. They cannot do without a cruel God. Strangely, they do not see that the violence we ourselves are in the process of amassing and that is looming over our own heads is entirely sufficient to trigger the worst. They have no sense of humor," unquote Girard. Does that apply to Thiel, in fact? He's always talking about Armageddon, about the apocalypse, but he doesn't believe in the fact that there is still hope, there is anxiety, as you say. Does that apply to Thiel's view and also to his take on Girard? Because, yes, what is the difference? But you have written a lot about it between Schmidt and Girard, in Thiel's view, between Leo Strauss and Girard, Voegelin and Girard, etc.
Yeah. I think it's an important question about the violence in God and Thiel's.
Yes, maybe my question was too long.
No, it's a very important question. I actually take a different road. I mean, what Girard writes here is very good, and twice in his book he says we have to get the apocalypse out of the fundamentalists' hands. And I think that's very important. And when I give talks about Thiel or also interviews about Thiel, I always say in the beginning, I mean, for us Europeans, it's very strange to talk about those issues. But I would, for instance, immediately defend that we talk about the apocalypse. And the most easy way to address that is the doomsday clock, you know, the clock that was started by Einstein, Oppenheimer and co. in 1947, and it was 7 minutes to midnight. When the hydrogen bomb was created, it went to 2 minutes. After the end of the Cold War, it went back to 17 minutes. And in this year, 2026, it's 85 seconds. So according to those scientists, the situation of our world was never so threatened than today. And there are other reasons why we should talk about an apocalyptic stage without freaking out, but seeing what's at stake. And I think that's what Girard is doing. Yeah. And what he criticizes is churches and theologies who, after the 60s, did not dare any longer to address those topics. And he said, we should do it, but not in the fundamentalist way. Now going to Thiel. Recently, and I think that's very significant, I don't think that Thiel is aligned with the fundamentalists. I think he plays, of course, because of course there's resonance and they are used to those terms. But in a recent interview, and that's significant and connected to that, because in November, the first part of his 4 lectures was published in First Things, always First Things, which is the conservative Christian journal in the United States. And accompanied to the publication of this essay, there is a podcast with Rusty Reno. Rusty Reno is a converted Catholic who is editor-in-chief of First Things. He just published a piece, Why Christian Nationalism is Right, and that would also be interesting to discuss. And he did a podcast with Thiel. And in this podcast, Thiel says the following. I mean, he distances himself from the evangelical fundamentalists because they believe that the Antichrist will really come. They really believe that Armageddon will happen, and Antichrist, Armageddon are just taking place, and then Christ comes. And they believe in this sequence, and they also believe that with the creation of the State of Israel, we are very close to that, and it was already under Reagan, and now again, the Iran war, that some of them really believe what's now going on takes us very close to what they are looking for. In this interview, Thiel says, I don't believe in that. I don't think that the Antichrist will really come. For me, it's a warning. So that's very, this podcast, it's a 1 hour podcast, shows that in some way he's really a believer. So when I listened to that, I said, because he talks about, he's very much in favor of action, and idleness is very bad. So that's also a reason why he likes Faust. And then in this talk, he talks also about even talks about Christ and about the disciples who slept on the Mount of Olives. So he said, probably if they wouldn't have slept, the history would have taken a different. So they were already sleeping, drug-taking, esoteric hippies instead of moving forward. So he's not on the side of fundamentalists, but he plays, of course, because he tries to convince the fundamentalists that as a Christian they can join his projects.
But when I heard your question properly, you also asked about violence in God and Thiel's stand on that aspect.
I think that in that regard, Thiel is. I also mentioned, but I didn't explain it in my talk, that in another podcast with Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson is one of the famous conservative people who tries to strengthen young men, and also says young men should again be ready to sacrifice and so on. That's good. That was good in the past, and we forgot that. And Thiel rejects that. Thiel is not in favor of sacrifice, and then he says, I am a non-reconstructed Girardian. I believe in the early Girard who rejects sacrifice. So therefore, Thiel represents anti-sacrificial in the way as the early Girard was represented. And I know that also in the Netherlands and Belgium, many people, Girardians, so to say, who liked his writings were shocked when in the middle of the 90s, Girard started to talk about sacrifice. I mean, I'm fully on the side of Girard, and if I would develop that paper more, I would say Thiel is anti-sacrificial. But in order to be convincingly anti-sacrificial, you have to think also about the situation where you have to choose between sacrificing another one or yourself. And then you are, as a Christian, forced to think about risking yourself. And that's also missing, because that would be altruism. That's missing in Thiel. So he is, in this way, a liberal Girardian without taking into account. So I don't think he would defend violence in God. And when he was in Innsbruck, there was the first bombing of Iran, and in July, last July. And there was a remark by Trump that he thanks God that God helped him to do this blow. And I said to Thiel, I mean, you defend those politicians. I find it really disgusting as a theologian to hear Trump talking in that way. And he defended Trump, not by joining Trump, but he says, well, this will deconstruct itself quite soon. So, I mean, he joins my criticism, but he wanted to defend also why he is aligned with Trump. I mean, I think Thiel is right in that respect, that this type of using Christian language by Hexet and Trump, and now it's even worse, that will on the long run many people will be disgusted by that kind. So it will undermine Christianity.
It will destroy itself.
Yeah.
Okay, then time for our last question.
Last question, please. Yes.
The third section. Maybe a small question, if I may. Rastorino, the editor of First Things, also wrote a book on strong gods. And the image of strong gods, how is that related to the image of the Christian view of God in Girard, the God of incarnation, the God of vulnerability, etc. But I try to link that to your interesting parallel to Goethe's Faust and what Hartmut Rosa wrote about it. First, I will say very humorous and interesting what you said about the Dutch people, but I'm from Belgium, so they have to they have to defend themselves. Yeah, I do not have to do that. But is Thiel's you compared Faust to Thiel, in fact, and can you relate that to what Girard is writing in his first book, Mensonges romantiques et vérités romanesques, on the romantic lie? So a Faustian entrepreneur is a type who is, yes, the victim of a romantic lie, who doesn't see the Romanesque truth, etc. Or he is the victim of what Girard calls metaphysical desire. And that's the reason why there is a lack of resonance in those people, resonance to the homeless people, to the migrants, etc. So would that be a correct, if Girard was still alive, because he, of course, knew Thiel, and Thiel was one of his most brilliant students, you are the victim of the romantic lie, you are the victim of metaphysical desire, or am I wrong, or not?
So that's not a small and easy question.
In the contrary.
I mean, first, because you mentioned Rastorino and his book Strong Gods. And actually, we also had in 2017 in January Rastorino in Innsbruck. A colleague of mine invited him, and that was just after the inauguration of Trump. And we asked him, how can you support Trump? Because Rastorino really supported him strongly. And I mean, he defended it and so on and so on. And then we challenged him a little bit. We said, what about kenosis? What about the insight of a God who is not a strong God in the sense of human projection of greatness? And he just smiled. I mean, kenosis theology is not the type of theology that Rastorino likes. And that reminded me, because in the Antichrist lectures that Thiel gave in Innsbruck, he had also a very strong section that we need in some way greatness, great man and so on. He showed a picture of Napoleon. My question was, is Trump for him a great man? And I challenged him with Simone Weil, who is a really representative of kenotic thinking, because kenosis is very dear to her heart. She says, only a God who is aligned with kenosis or with the Zimtzum, the Jewish Zimtzum, who makes himself smaller in order to enable creation, is the true God, and everything else is just a human projection. And she writes, and I told him that she writes in her Needs for Root, so her last book, fragmentary book, that the French people need nothing more than greatness. Greatness, the need for greatness is bigger than the need for bread, but another type of greatness. And then she says, and I find it marvelous to think about it, because she wrote that in 1943 towards the French. If you French people are thinking Napoleon is an example of good greatness, and do not understand that the greatness represented by Napoleon is the same greatness represented by Adolf Hitler, That's really a challenging demand. You have understood nothing. They all represent Roman greatness, and this is not the greatness we need. We need the kenotic greatness if such a paradox is possible. And I said that even a little bit more developed than I did it now to Thiel, and there was no response. So he responded to some of my things, but this he...
And related to this question of romantic...
yeah, one more sentence. If you listen to Elon Musk and some others, they are now referring to great Roman fighters, whatever, as examples. So you see, they are on this dangerous Roman road. The second thing about the romantic lie and the metaphysical desire, I think, and I interestingly came across by chance in writings of Hannah Arendt, because I never realized, despite that I studied her and wrote about her, she was extremely critical of sovereignty. So she said, as long as the states claim sovereignty, we will have wars. And she said about the United Nations in 1970, either the United Nations, as long as they believe in sovereignty, will never really work and function, or one nation will overtake it, and then we will have some kind of tyrannical anti-Christ, not her words, but in the Thielian sense. But she goes even deeper, and in her Denktagebuch, she says the term sovereignty is even wrong if you use it for single people, because no human being is sovereign. We are relational beings, and the thought of being sovereign is anthropologically wrong. And then I suddenly said, this is the main insight of Girard also, because Girard knows we are relational, and the romantic lie is to overlook, to think you can be disconnected, you can be sovereign. I mean, Jacques Maritain, who also understood that sovereignty is prone to war, and so after the Second World War, he really criticized the term sovereignty and said sovereign is only God, and we should not use the term sovereignty at all for human belongings. I would go even a step further and say, because Simone Weil would criticize Maritain and would even say thinking that God is sovereign is still a projection of this human, and what you said about metaphysical desire and romantic lie. And isn't it interesting that this book that I mentioned, that is so influential for Thiel, this book, The Sovereign Individual, has this term. So this is the sovereign individual, and sovereign individual is impossible, and it's a romantic lie and results in that. So I thank you for your question, because it made me connect that a little bit closer and have to write it down for me.
But your tendency is towards a yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. It's not only a tendency. It's. I mean, I am always careful. I've never looked into the heart of Peter Thiel.
No,
and I'm when you engage with him from person to person, he's less a monster than when you see him what he does politically. And I mean, he did a interview with a right-wing German, Swiss weekly newspaper in last October. That was after our talks, and I was shocked. I mean, when I read that, how can he do that? I mean, when he agreed Trump has done most of all politicians in recent decades, so to say, for supporting the international order. I mean, how can you? This is wrong, and so the whole attitude and Vance is great, and he might be the successor. But if you talk to him in person, he's reflective. He often does not answer quickly, so he thinks. And sometimes it's really a hardship, because you ask him a question, and then you have to wait a long time until something comes out, and you are in the situation, should I say again something, or is it over? And so if you listen to the podcast with Rusty Reno, after I listened to that, I said, one has to be careful. After this hour, I had the feeling he really tries to be a Christian, not of my type and with all those weaknesses, but I would not. I mean, when people say he's just instrumentalizing Christianity and using it for his benefit, I think that's superficial. But that's I don't know.
No, thank you. Last time when you were here, and when we mentioned that Wolfgang would also come, you expressed your desire for putting some theological questions, isn't it? Are you satisfied?
Oh yes, I do want to take time from other people, but I'm satisfied. But if I may raise a last question. Yeah. Vance was really influenced by Thiel. And I read his text, How I Joined the Resistance, and he said, Thiel converted me, in fact. How is it? And Vance was converted to a Catholic, and Thiel is no Catholic, although in a number of journals they say that he is Catholic. Maybe the same applies to Vance. Of course, I don't think you know him, but normally we say Thiel, Vance, Sachs, all these people are kind of monsters. But it's interesting that you say they do not instrumentalize their religion, their faith, their belief. There is something genuine in it, honest. And when I read Vance's essay, he was a lawyer, he got a lot of money, and then he skipped with it, and he said, I want to become a decent father, I want to do something for the general good, etc. So that's very interesting. On the one hand, you think, what kind of man is that Thiel? And on the other hand, you have to try to take him seriously in order to be honest to him. That's very interesting. And Thiel was really the inspirer of Vance's conversion. So that's one of my questions. On how is that possible that these people are supporting Donald Trump, etc.? Is that only that they see opportunities for becoming richer or more powerful? No, that's too superficial, as you say. So you have the misuse of Christianity and the different ways, so lurking people or luring them in a very bad direction. It's not a question, but it is...
yeah, but I can tell you something that's also, I think, interesting. Yeah, I will keep it short, but it's very, very important.
Yeah, it's a key question, by the way. Okay. This is a key question.
Yeah, it's a key question. Yeah. I said to Thiel also, I mean, to use Greta Thunberg as an example for the legionnaire of the Antichrist is a cheap thing, because you can find some applause by conservative climate deniers. But I said to him, you should really be clear. The most dangerous people in the last 60, 70, probably 100 years are the Catholic popes, because in the encyclical Pacem in Terris of 1963, John the 23rd asked for the build-up of world authority with effective means. And this idea is still supported by all the followers of John the 23rd. And that was his reaction on the Cuban Missile Crisis, so this apocalyptic situation. So, I mean, that's... So I said to Thiel, what do you think about that? And he also, I mean, he was encircled about 20 Catholic theologians, so he was very, very careful about that. But I think if you think his ideas through, the Catholic popes are very dangerous from his perspective. And I feel he should express that more clearly. Then a person like Vance has to decide, do I go with the popes or do I go with Thiel? And interestingly, so he was very careful in Innsbruck. Of course, if 20 Catholic theologians are sit there, you don't challenge them. But we have the leaked interviews, the leaked discussion in San Francisco. And here there was a different setting. And there he said, J.D. Vance should pray for the Pope, but not listen to the Pope. And so that shows a little bit. Other people said to me, but I don't know Vance at all, Vance is quite empty person and would do everything for his career. And then a last thing, because I'm thinking myself about Vance now, I think Vance and Thiel are deeper in their hearts against the Iran war. And Vance was also absent in the Venezuela thing, and in the Iran war he was also not upfront, so the journalists pushed him, and recently they asked him, are you supporting the war? And he said yes, but in a way that you feel it's a yes he has to say, because Trump would not accept anyone who is critical of him. So that's also the difficulty of Vance. I don't know, so we will see. I was 2 weeks ago, I was very close to write to Thiel again and said, now is the situation, if anything what you said to me about his criticism of George Bush and so on is valid, you have to stand up and said, this war is really completely wrong. But then there is this connection to Israel and Netanyahu. He's a strong defender of Netanyahu. He says it's a crime that he can no longer go to the Netherlands or other things. That's very strange, and it's again I cannot really put it all together.
Am I right when I summarize or when I pick up out of all the newspapers and so on that he supports Trump because Trump is a restrainer in the positive sense, so to say, not in the Antichrist sense.
Yeah.
And that's why Trump fits in his theology, in his philosophy.
And Trump is a man of action. I mean, so Sleepy Joe, as Trump called Biden, is also in Thiel's view a senile guy who does nothing. So Thiel is also someone, he prefers someone who does anything than nothing. And in this, again, in this podcast with Rusty Reno, he uses the term, this colorful president, talking about colorful president. I mean, he is colorful. For my taste, too colorful and the wrong colors.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think...
not really rainbow, right?
I think it's high time to give some room to the audience. I have, for reasons of recording, to repeat the questions. Try to repeat the questions. And the question from Simon is how Thiel, as the owner of Palantir, relates to what's happening now in the with Trump and all the things around it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. Also difficult to know really everything that one should know. But first of all, I would say you have to recognize the date when Palantir was founded. And that's closely connected to the Straussian movement, because Palantir was founded in 2003. So it was a reaction to 9/11 also that I highlighted already. And I know that PayPal was several times by cyber attacks by criminals so much attacked that they were, I think, 2 times close to get completely bankrupt. By fighting against those cyber attacks in the time of Palantir, they developed quite some knowledge how to deal with data and so on. So Palantir was a result of using the knowledge they learned with PayPal to fight against those who wanted to corrupt the system, to use it as a tool to fight against it. And the main thing I think that Palantir is doing is putting different databases together and so use those data and patterns that you can discover for insight. So there is a lot of things that are worrying. So Palantir is using for ICE, you know, the institution that goes after immigrants, legal or illegal, and so on. It's also, I know, in parts of Germany it's used, so it's sold to states and companies who use those things. And of course, and that's already highlighted in this biography or this book on Thiel Shefkin with the title The Contrarian, because on the one side, as I highlighted, Thiel is a libertarian who wants to get rid of the state or weaken the state or undermine the state, but at the same time, Palantir and some other companies, and that's also true for Bezos and also true for Elon Musk, they do a lot of business with the state, so they get a lot of money by selling those tools to the state. So you have to think about how does that go together. You want to get rid of the state, but you make a lot of money by making contracts with the state. My thesis, and I mean, I'm always looking, do I find more proof or do I find things that contradict it? My thesis is that after 9/11, Thiel accepted to a certain degree that a certain type of state, a certain type of Schmittian in geopolitical structure will be necessary because there is terrorism, there are all those dangers. And his tools he developed and sells to states to do those things help him financially. I know that Palantir in the last couple of years gave him a lot of money. So it was a very successful thing to create that and sell it to state agencies. And of course, such things are also involved in war. But I don't think that he is asking for the war. I mean, you give the tool to the state, and the state uses it for whatever the state thinks it's useful. But the contradiction we have to think about is the libertarian get rid of the state and tools. And I mean, others and myself also, I asked him, I mean, if you think over-regulation or a worldwide regulation is the most dangerous thing that even you call the Antichrist, Palantir would be the perfect tool to use. So if we get an Antichrist, Palantir would be the first thing the Antichrist would need to target ours. And then he doesn't give a convincing answer. And Palantir, they had also a podcast with the New York Times, one of the higher people who really run the thing. He says, we try to combine both things, security and individual privacy.
Thank you. Therese wants, I think, to put a connecting question. Therese, onder de Wijngaard, asks about the disruptive way of thinking in the tech brothers and how this relates to the current situation, also being interpreted by Beatrice de Graaf. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree fully, And I've not read everything from this book. The Sovereign Individual is quite a thick book and not very, it's not a page turner in that sense, but I read just chapter 10, the demise, the weakening of democracy. And they predicted in 1997 a world where no state is possible, the people will get organized security themselves. And I read it with the knowledge what happened in 9/11. And I think that was completely not unforeseen, because if you think about a world without states, without all those things, you today would immediately say, well, that can be exploited by any single individual with even a small weapon and blow the whole thing up or do a lot of damage, and so what? And so I think what we see today is in some way the sovereign individual plus doing something in order to prevent terrorists. I mean, it's not possible. Total security is not possible. And if you would try total security, you would be in the you would create the Antichrist. And so there is this contradiction which relates to what happened.
Thank you. Will Egan, yes.
You answer to it.
Yeah.
I try to summarize. Connecting with Eric Gans is the question whether Thiel and Gans are not so much against the state, but against the wokeism of the state. That's your question, I think.
Yeah, I think that's again a very important question, and it was also addressed in the discussion with Thiel, because when I'm asked how can some of the conservative followers of Girard, are they right to claim that they are following the Girardian pattern? I think what you addressed gives some lines in that direction, because if you read I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, the chapter on Nietzsche and concern for victims, Girard has a quite simple concept following Nietzsche, that he says the fascists and the right wing wants to go back behind the biblical revelation, no longer having any concern for victims. And the left is overtaking Christianity, creating a new kind of totalitarianism. And then there are other remarks by him against political correctness and so on. So there are remarks that the left is very dangerous because they exploit the concern for victims and turn it into a weapon. It's interesting even that Girard says that is the meaning of Antichrist, to protect victims by persecuting the persecutors. That's, according to Girard, the Antichrist. And I think, I mean, in my book on mimetic theory, and I was criticized heavily again and again, there is not a single word of criticism against Girard. And this is academically today, you should not do that, because academics have to write and then at least 10 pages, the master I'm writing about is wrong in this and this. So when I wrote my book, I had no criticism of Girard. Today I have one in this respect, because I think he's right partly. There is a kind of weaponized wokeism, and we have to criticize that. But at the same time, I always say at the center of wokeism is the concern for victims. And if we criticize wokeism and put the baby out of the water, or what is the term? Yeah. Then, so we should fight against the perversion of the concern of victims, but not give up the center of this. But then a couple of years ago, I gave a lecture on Girard in Leuven, and Jacques Haars, you know him. He's a Jesuit and very aligned with liberation theology. He told me something that opened my eyes, and I criticized Girard for that reason, and I told that to Thiel too. George Orwell wrote in the 30s or early 40s a review of Hitler's Mein Kampf. And in this review, George Orwell observes that Hitler presents himself in Mein Kampf as the crucified, as the martyr, as the victim. And George Orwell says that's the reason why the German people were so fond of him and joined him, because also the German people felt we are victimized by the West, by the communists, by the Jews, everyone, by the French, everyone is against us. And now we have to fight back because we can no longer allow to be victimized. And for me, the important thing about that is that Girard's simple systematic is not really correct, because even the fascists, even the right wing, exploit the status of the victims for their own concern. So this abuse of the concern for victims is not only something you can observe on the left. You can today even observe it stronger on the right, because Trump all the time shows his victimization, the MAGA movement, all the extreme right movements in Europe, they talk again and again about victimization. I mean, sometimes victimization is really there, but to say that the exploitation or the negative, the perversion of the concern for victims is a left-wing thing only, that's wrong.
And Bart, yes, please. Bart Lehmann's question was about a process theology related to the technological view of development and evolution. Is there a relation?
Yeah, I've never heard about that, so that he was interested or is interested in process theology, but I would say, as far as I understood him, I would agree with your thesis. So, I mean, that's also when he talks about against Edenism, or when he talks we are co-creators, and sometimes you have even the feeling we should do God's work all by ourselves. I mean, not close to that. Yeah, I would say that I would agree.
Okay, thank you. Only us Dutch, we are co-creators with God, creating land.
Yeah.
Okay. Hubert René, yes. Okay. A short comment from Hubert that Pascal Bruckner already wrote about this.
But Bruckner is also someone who sees it as a problem of the left, as far as I realized, and this is just wrong. I mean, it just shows that the biblical concern for victims has conquered the whole world. And what I mean, you can say that the two pillars of the biblical revelation is concern for, I mean, in difference to the violent sacred of the times before, it's the concern for victims plus forgiveness, The first pillar has conquered the whole world. The second, it's difficult to follow. And I myself say, if someone 20 years ago wrote a bad review of a book of mine, I do not forget. I mean...
Leave alone forgive.
Yeah. No, I try, but I think I would say we even personally experience it's harder to forgive than to understand the morality, the higher moral status of victimhood.
Up to now, I was able to mention the names, but now your name, I don't know. Michael's question, summarized, referring to a passage in Goethe, in Faust, asks whether all these techno developments are very masculine, powerful, and lacks of feminine energy. How do you see?
Yeah. First of all, I referred in my talk to Hartmut Rosa's book Resonance, and he puts the indirect killing of Gretchen and the killing of Philemon and Baucis together. So I just took the later part. And about Girard and women, I think he defended from the very beginning that females who are outside of the power circles have a better view of what is really true. And you see it very strongly in his Shakespeare book, in the Shakespeare book. And in my book, I ended, as I think the last, or not the very last, but the one before the last. I had a chapter on how mimetic theory relates to feminism, and so at the time when I wrote that was highly discussed also in universities. And I think that Girard understands that women, as far as they are out of the power centers, they see what's going on. And so he refers, for instance, to the women who were the first witnesses of the resurrection. I don't recall now all the examples, but there are several things. I mean, he was criticized again by feminists. So Girard really tried to throw a ball to the feminist discussion in the 80s. Doril Moy, some quite prominent women took it up, but some also criticized him. So that's an open, a little bit an open question. But if you look carefully, and especially to the Shakespeare book, and especially to the play, where the Pygmalion thing is. The Pygmalion thing is, Winter's Tale. Winter's Tale is a very strong support of the female view, and also in this part he rejects the traditional Christian linkage of original sin to women. So he undermines that. I mean, for the time, that was quite opening up. I mean, today we are in this question a little bit further, but maybe Guido has something to say in this direction.
No, thank you. Yeah. Once again, Simon, I try to summarize. Persecutors in the US now are persecuting those who are accused of being persecutors, so to say. There is no balance between, or there is always a going and through of left and right, and persecuting and then against. There's antagonism, was what you said. What's the situation now? How can this relate to democracy? That's what you ask, isn't it? Peter?
Democracy. I mean, first of all, the problem is that proper democracy, of course, is a kind of non-violent struggle. It's a war without killing and so on, so it's a struggle and it's also necessary. But underneath, there has to be a common ground in order to let the enemy or the adversary live, and that the majority allows the minority to become itself a majority. So the democracy needs the dispute and the struggle, but on the basis of some common ground. And if this common ground is no longer there, then it gets very dangerous. And I think what we see now is that the common ground is partly no longer there or really breaking down. And I mean, I very much like the work, which is not aligned with theology and very critical of the Catholic Church, by Hans Kelsen, but I don't know if he is known in the Netherlands. He was He was, among others, the creator of the Austrian Constitution, but he had to flee. He was Jewish background. He then went to Berkeley, and he wrote in the years between the 20s and 30s of last century very interesting books on democracy. And he said, and he was an adversary of Carl Schmitt. So Carl Schmitt was even involved when he lost his professorship in Bonn, I think, Köln or Bonn, Kelsen. But Kelsen, Hans Kelsen, Kelsen. And he wrote, he said, what kind of person is, so he was, what is the term? He was reine Rechtslehre. He was a positivist, absolute positivist, criticized by Schmitt as completely wrong. But he was not only a positivist, there was something more. And this more was that he said, what kind of person is necessary for democracy? And he said, we need persons who can lower their own self-esteem, who have a little bit, they have to have humility in order to give space for the other. And then he makes even a very interesting religious reflection. And he was, at that time, I mean, the Austrian Catholic Church had no sympathy for democracy at all. And Kelsen was convinced Catholicism can never be aligned with democracy. So, but he made a religious reflection, and because he had no trust in Christianity at all, he moved to the Upanishads. And in the Upanishads, there's this famous line, Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi, that means that is also you. And it's a story of a father who goes with his son through the world, and the son, as small kids do, asks always the father, what is this, what is this, what is this, what is this? He points to a tree, what is this? And the father always gives the answer, Tattvamasi, that's also you. So referring to the connection of everything. So you could say a cosmological brotherhood or sisterhood, so to say. And this is the precondition, according to Kelsen, of democracy. And so democracy is built on equality, liberty, and fraternity. If you use the fraternity, I mean in German it's easier for me because I say Geschwisterlichkeit, which means sisterhood and brotherhood. We have to be careful and clear about that. But this is the precondition, the sisterhood and brotherhood as a precondition that equality and liberty can be balanced. And this is one of the problems today, that this general basis is missing.
Thank you. Yeah, Guido.
I fully agree to that distinction, but in addition to it, and in application to Thiel, the co-founder, I think, of Palantir, but the current CEO of Palantir is Alex Karp. And Karp is also a German, like Thiel, born in, people often, you can read it in all journals, that he made his doctoral dissertation in Frankfurt under the guidance of Jürgen Habermas, who died last week. But it was not under the guidance of Jürgen Habermas. Jürgen Habermas is a defender of democracy. He's a defender of what is called in German Herrschaftsfreie Dialog. While Karp, the title of his dissertation is Aggression and Jargon. And so you have a completely different view of how to use language in the perspective of Alex Karp, who is the CEO of Palantir. That's aggression. It's also related, but you can tell more about it. Leo Strauss, his esoteric writing, and Thiel often refers to it. You have to be tactical in the way you try to give a message to the people. Do not be too open. Try to be esoteric. So now we are living in a completely polarized world, And that's a death blow to democracy, because democracy, you start from different opinions and you try to find a consensus. And I think in Alex Karp's view, there is no consensus possible. And then we return to the friend-enemy distinction of Carl Schmitt. And that's a death blow to democracy, I think.
Truth not unveiled, but veiled in that sense.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Truth, indeed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, the starting point is agonistic. You have the Belgian philosopher, female philosopher,
Chantal Mouffe,
who is working with that. But there is I think, a big difference between Chantal Mouffe's approach of antagonism and Karp's and Thiel's approach to antagonism. I think, but you already referred to it, there is this kind of anxiety in the approach of these people. Anxiety that everything is going wrong and we have to protect us against it, etc. While you have an other view of democracy, believing that antagonism is the first word, but not the last word, I think.
Okay. Tell me your name. Lea, yes, please. Is it possible to save the world, and which seems to be your message, like Thiel, and yet there is no connection in love with it and in the heart of it? That's, I think, your question.
I mean, my answer would be: is it really saving the world, or is it saving individual freedom? I mean, if you put individual freedom as the highest good, as it is in the libertarian writings, you really would not like to have a regulation. You really wouldn't like to have an Antichrist in the Thielian sense. So I would say that's the main thing that I feel. So the other thing, when he says, and I summarized it a little bit, overcoming cancer, overcoming dementia, and all those things by technology. I haven't heard him saying how he would universalize that. I mean, you can go forward in this direction, and I'm in agreement with this, but I would also like to see how this will really benefit the people as a whole. And I have one anecdote that I now often use because it says something. I also, around Thiel, I met one of the researchers, Sonja Aronson, who is in the Singularity University, sponsored by Google and so on, who try to overcome death and are in favor of longevity. And she gave me her book, and typical for Silicon Valley in this field, the book is full of biblical quotes. So they show that going for longevity, overcoming death is deeply biblical. And I interestingly agree with that, because I really had, in the pandemic that came up in a very strange way by Agamben and others, if theologians make the dead a nice thing and forget what Paul said, that the death is the last enemy, then I think it's not the task of religion to make the death something that is not terrible. That means, of course, we need both. We need a strong emphasis on life, and we need also some kind of an acceptance of death, but not something we should seek and so on. So I'm in favor of going forward in longevity research in some way. And I was working a couple of years on Gandhi, and I found something, and that was really surprising for me. Because I said, Gandhi, who said the most important thing for nonviolent fighters is to get rid of being afraid of death, and so on. So I said, I thought, he's a guy who doesn't have a problem to fight for longevity and so on. But Gandhi was convinced by a certain interpretation of a verse in the Upanishads that we human beings are dedicated for 125 years. And he himself believed, I mean, he was shot, he believed with his dietary and with all the things he did that he will achieve what we are supposed to be and get to 125. And he wrote again and again about this, and there's a one-page text by him where he said this is what we should aim at, but he said 125 years of life in service, meaning in service to others. And I said, well, I have to give that to Thiel and to those guys because I never heard about longevity and service, meaning that would be resonance. And when the cover conference was in St. Louis University, Thiel had a keynote speech, and on the next day I was invited with 15 other people to a breakfast with him. And I was seated next to him, which is an honor, but also a little bit difficult because because you have to make interesting comments and so on. And I said, this is now the opportunity, and I told him what I just told you, longevity, yes, with Gandhi in service. And what was his response? I don't like Gandhi. And so this discussion was...
Well, I think...
One remark.
Very short. Time is over. Thank you.
Question. It's impossible.
Yeah, I said already, I mean, the idea of sovereignty has to be criticized. That's a key insight of Hannah Arendt. Sovereignty is impossible. And I mean, that you can learn from even, you know, yesterday I had with Jeanette the chance to the Metamorphosis exhibition in the Rijksmuseum, and they show also the myth of Narcissus. And of course I was immediately reminded of Girard's and Dubuis' interpretation that narcissism is impossible because we cannot strengthen ourselves just out of ourselves. There is only pseudo-narcissism possible. So pseudo-narcissism, if you are a narcissist and you see it with Trump, you have to force all the people that that they praise you all the time. So you have to feed the narcissist. And Simone Weil has also deep insight. She said, egoism is not possible. I mean, that seems strange because I have my egoism and you see a lot of egoism. But ultimately, egoism is impossible in the sense you cannot be strong just on your own. So if you are an egoist, you have to force other people to adore you, which is already an act of violence. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And Girard, actually, in the Shakespeare book, he had powerful examples of blown-up narcissists who are completely finished if there is one person who has no reason at all to adore this person, and then the bubble explodes. And
well, thank you so much. Michael, you yourself said in our break, why so short time? Isn't it?
Why not the whole day?
Why not a whole day? There is, I think, stuff enough for a whole day and more, but we have to keep our time. Thank you so much, Wolfgang.
Yeah, thank you.
For the very clear presentation and answering our questions. Guido, thank you for bringing in the comments. The word is for our president. Yes.
Can I give you
yeah.